Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive. Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Up Close, Conversations with Federal Leaders is underwritten by Tableau.
Thanks for joining us today. We're talking with Dr. Susan Gregurick, who works with the National Institutes of Health on big data and big science initiatives to help combat things like the current COVID-19 pandemic, as well as all other kinds of infectious diseases and health matters. Susan, thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you so much, Aaron, for inviting me. This is pretty exciting for me. I'm Susan Gregurick. I'm the Associate Director for Data Science within the Office of the Director at the National Institutes of Health. And my role is really to help coordinate, catalyze, and oversee strategic visions for data science that are trans-NIH. That means that they go beyond just one institute or one center and really add capabilities to our data science portfolios across our different activities and goals.
Excellent. Now, data science, I imagine, is not a new thing for the health sector, right? There's always been lots of data in health, and it's always been important to use that data appropriately. And we're going to talk more about what appropriately means. But you serve as a top data scientist, and you actually helped stand up a new office there at NIH, correct?
Correct. I have a tiger team of really talented and capable folks who work with me, and we work to catalyze training. We work to catalyze new infrastructure, in particular our STRIDES initiative. We work to catalyze new tools and analytics and new capabilities in artificial intelligence. We're a small team and a small office with a fairly small budget of $30 million a year. So we really have to be strategic and coordinated in order to basically make the impact that we can make across NIH and hopefully for other federal agencies and researchers.
Excellent. So I want to get a little bit deeper into that office and how it operates. Primarily, are people coming to you with data and research ideas, or are you creating products that then can go out to other areas in NIH and beyond? How do you interact with the broader world?
That's a great question. We have our guiding principle, our North Star for our office is the NIH Strategic Plan for Data Science, a document that was written in coordination with our Scientific Data Council. And it's really a document that reflects the vision of all of NIH, contributed to by many of our NIH colleagues, including IC directors like Dr. John Lorsch and Dr. Eric Green. That document lays out five main goals in terms of community engagement and enriching a broader community for data science, developing our workforce both at NIH and in the extramural community, enhancing our data ecosystem, both for our repositories that are supported by NIH as well as generalist repositories, enhancing our data infrastructure, for example, utilizing cloud service providers, and finally, developing tools and analytics. All of that work is done in partnership with our institutes. Some of that work involves intramural researchers, such as our data infrastructure, and some of that work involves our extramural researchers in academic settings such as universities and medical centers. And there we see an awful lot of really great work in tool and analytics development and artificial intelligence, and in training the next generation of data scientists.
So a lot of times when we look across government at different agencies that use a lot of data, there's often a lot of data nerds, some IT engineers, some mathematicians now and again, but it's hard to find true data scientists. How much of what you do is trying to act as the in-house data scientist for all of NIH and the entire academic world? And how much of it is just trying to get those basic concepts into the hands of people who, while they might not be classically trained as data scientists, can still do that kind of work?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Many of my colleagues in my office and myself act as advisors to institutes and centers who are standing up new data science capabilities. A perfect example of that is the HEAL, Helping End Addiction Long-Term initiative, where we've been strong partners and advisors in the data resources that they are developing for that particular initiative. And in other areas we lead, such as in developing tools and analytics that really bring new software engineering capabilities to our academic researchers. many times we are here to help, but we have a great bench of data scientists across NIH. Many of these are program directors or the chief information officers and ICs. And so part of what my office does is to leverage those resources, develop strong working groups, and we have probably almost 30 working groups across NIH in data and analytics and workforce development, and bring those capabilities together. Oftentimes, when you're working as an individual in an IC, it's hard to understand what can be leveraged across NIH. And part of my role is to provide that vision of where we can go as an organization together in data science. And that's part of the role of my office.
Excellent. So I want to ask you, just wide-eyed, looking up to the stars, there are no limits. Where are we going with data science? What's the big brass ring? Where if you could science fiction, magic, wave a wand, and we get there tomorrow, what's the big goal for data science in public health?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. And I have a lot of aspirational goals, and some of them I think can be achieved soon, and some will be a little bit longer. It's anticipated that by 2025, we'll have something like 175 zettabytes of data. Most of that will probably be on the cloud. Not all of that is biomedical data, that's just data. But having that amount of data available, even for biomedical research or clinical research, really is a grand challenge and a grand opportunity. What I would love to see is our ability to think about how we are going to stand up data infrastructures that support data analytics and the FAIR principles: findable data, accessible data, reusable data, and the really hard one is interoperable. So for me, that is where I've been focusing a lot of my attention, is thinking about interoperability amongst data platforms and amongst data, creating those really key interoperable capabilities on the data platforms that we already have now will help us utilize that future data, and it's only 5 years away, so that we can actually get more bang for our buck with the data that we're producing. And interoperability, it starts small and it builds, and we've had some really early good successes that we're now leveraging to address COVID-19. I think for me, that's where my real focus and vision is really creating those interoperable resources, creating fair data that goes beyond just one single data set, but actually finding data at large across our data ecosystem, and then training the next generation of researchers to use data at that scale. And that is an unprecedented scale. It will take new computational resources and new infrastructure.
And you mentioned, artificial intelligence before. I imagine that's going to be really important, especially to kind of smooth out some of those interoperability issues. And I want to focus on that for just a second. Then I want to talk a bit about some of your COVID work, and then some more about just health data in general and some of the work you've done. But as we start, we stay with the interoperability issue. I can tell you, as a journalist who now and again dips their toe into big data reporting, I'm certainly not a data scientist myself, but I try to look at big numbers now and again. Dirty and unstructured data is the bane of my existence, and there is no easy way to fix it that I know of, other than just line by line and knowing what you're doing, which in my case isn't always true. So how are you all dealing with that issue? It seems like it's the biggest intractable issue in data writ large, let alone health data.
It is a very difficult challenge. If you ask folks like yourself or data scientists, how do you spend your time? Mostly the response will come back, I spend about 80% of my time basically cleaning data and making it usable, making it more or less aggregable and interoperable. And that's something that we can address now, and we are trying to address this in our COVID-19 work as well as in the work that I'm doing. And there are a few really great capabilities that we're leveraging. One of them is fast healthcare interoperable resources, FHIR, to help us interoperate between the health IT data, which comes in formats like OMOP or I2B2, and the clinical research data, which is a little bit more unstructured. So we have a number of pilots to really merge our clinical research with our health IT data structures through FHIR. We're also developing common data elements, particularly for COVID-19, where we want to have data that's collected across the country, and particularly in our medical institutes and centers, and have that data basically interoperate so that we can address COVID at scale. Means that we have to have some common language or common data elements. Another capability that we're looking at in the research element is just making metadata, the information about the data, more structured and more computable. If we can leverage just a few of those capabilities, making metadata more structured, more computable, making interoperability between health IT data and clinical research data, and then adopting some common structures for data that's related to disease, I think we'll make progress. We're going to wrap this up because of COVID, but this is something that we were committed to even before COVID.
So let's use COVID as a good case example then. So how are you ensuring that there's at least some structure to the data that you all are getting? I imagine things like the pop-up testing sites that are literally outside of pharmacies and the like, and some of the relaxed data standards that have come through in order to speed up the response to COVID. That's got to give you all some heartburn. How are you managing all of that?
So from the work that I'm doing, I'm really working at the clinical research data side, although our rapid accelerated diagnostics platforms, we are also working on this. And here for us, it's creating high throughput pipelines to ingest that data into data warehouses or data coordination centers. We have to adopt some common data elements and a common data model in order to facilitate that pipeline. So the data that we're collecting, it is de-identified and it's aggregated in our coordination centers and our data hubs. That data we'll make available to researchers. I think, in fact, the first launch of the N3C will be around August 17th. And here that's a coordination warehouse for near to real-time clinical data from our CTSAs and our CTSRs. And we're super excited about this launch and about making this data available to researchers, because this data really is clinical data from electronic healthcare records, from testing devices and other types of diagnostics from patients who are COVID positive.
And I want to get into more about the M3C, because that's a very interesting program for what we're talking about here today. But just before we get there, I'm curious about how much of a base there was for reporting COVID data. COVID-19 is obviously the novel form of the coronavirus, but coronavirus has been around before. It's not itself a new disease. So were there already formats, were there already fields? Was there a shorthand for coronavirus in most data input systems, or did all those standards have to get built on the fly?
My understanding, and because I was brought into this when COVID became such a national pandemic, my understanding is that there was some basis that we have built upon, and the phenotype for these type of infrastructures has been developed over many years. And there was some basis that we could rely on. We've had to ramp this quite a bit fast because of COVID, but we did not start from scratch. We started from a good foundation. And some of this has been led by the NIAID and Dr. Tony Fauci's institute.
Excellent. So let's talk about the N3C program. I actually wrote about it not too long ago because you all were looking for an honest data broker. And of course, I saw the word honest data broker not being in health data myself. I went, well, that's interesting. Who would hire a dishonest data broker? But that's not what we're talking about, right? Can you talk about why you would need an honest data broker and what's happening to patient data as you all ingest it?
Absolutely. So the honest data broker is sort of a term of art for us, and it's really a neutral third party that is an intermediary between the providers of clinical data from participants and the NIH, who would fund a data warehouse. And they really make sure that the privacy and the confidentiality of that data is preserved. And we need an honest data broker basically for three, I like to call these use cases. The first is that we need to make sure that across our systems, be they testing devices through the RAD program or the clinical data warehouse that we're funding, across these systems, we can link participant data so that if you're Jane Doe in a testing site and you're also Jane Doe in a clinic, and we know you're the same Jane Doe, we can make sure that the data is linked. It doesn't mean that your privacy is compromised. It just means that the data is attributed to you, is all there for you. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that if researchers are building cohorts for studies and for clinical trials, that honest broker can provide that de-identified information for the clinical researchers. And the third reason is, and this may be certainly true in our underserved populations, when looking to build new trials, if we would like, or to let participants know of particular outcomes, if we would like to recontact a patient, we cannot do that because we don't have the information, but the honest broker can help facilitate that recontact. And that's really why we need that honest broker, and we need to have those privacy-preserving algorithms such as hash to enable that to happen. And I think that's the importance of why the N3C and NCATS is soliciting for the honest broker. And I'm certainly excited about that, and I'm anticipating that we'll be leveraging their work for other COVID projects, which would be just fantastic.
The three things you mentioned, it occurs to me, are largely about ensuring the patient gets the right kind of communication and care, right? So that the researchers can do their job, but if they have to go back, it's all about patient side. There was one other aspect of that I thought was interesting, which is on the researcher side, because of the way that the data is anonymized, they're actually able to conduct certain amounts of research without getting additional consent, which I imagine is important right now due to the need for speed.
That's true. I do point out that we make sure that the consent that we do obtain, particularly from underserved populations, is preserved, and it's preserved in this way through the honest broker. So, through a lot of digital technology, we can ensure that data is not distributed, that is not going with the consent of the individual. And that's one of the nice things that we've done through our researcher authentication services, is just making sure that each data has its particular consent, and that we track that through the entire research process so that we do not divulge data in a way that is not how the participant intended that data to be divulged.
So that's interesting. Is there a way that you could continue to anonymize data in a way that it could be used without any consent, right? Could you get to a point where it wouldn't expose a patient to any privacy concerns and therefore you could use it for any means, or would that water down the data too much?
I think that not necessarily at NIH, but in the Census Department, they're exploring the ideas of differential privacy, where data can be exposed to analytics tools that ensures privacy and does not necessarily have the same level of the way that we have data access requirements at NIH. So I think in Census, they are exploring differential privacy. There's also the idea of homomorphic encryption, but for biomedical data right now, it's a little bit, that process is a little hard to scale at the data that we have. And so it still remains in the hands of researchers in computer science, but that certainly is something in the future. And when we eventually get to quantum computing, that might throw additional tools and additional challenges our way.
Yeah, imagine if you can look at every possibility at once, the mosaic effect really congeals a lot faster. And the differential privacy thing you mentioned, I actually wrote about Census doing that with the citizenship estimates a few months back.
Absolutely. That's cool.
Really cool. Yeah.
That is a really cool project. Yes.
Yeah. So, but this brings me to my next point, which is thinking about Census. They didn't invent it, but they had to apply an entirely new privacy philosophy to the work they were doing in order to avoid the mosaic effect with some of their anonymized data. So it leads me to my next thought, particularly with the current crisis. It's the urgency is obviously there, right? We need to move now. but that doesn't mean that privacy is not important. It sounds like this, the honest data broker system is one way that you can balance urgency and privacy without really having to give up too much of either, right? It sounds like a nice balance for both. How long has this been around? Was this a new idea that was either developed around this pandemic or was kind of nascent and had to get pushed forward? And just more in general, for these different privacy and urgency capabilities that you're pushing out there, how many of these are brand new because of this current crisis, and how many of these are tried and true?
Oh, I would say that the idea of anonymous broker is definitely not new and not new to NIH. In fact, I believe this is the same type of infrastructure that we have set up for the All of Us program. And some of the capabilities that we leverage build on those existing learned lessons. And so that is absolutely true. It's true for other activities as well, where that neutral third party has really benefited NIH in terms of ensuring privacy and confidentiality of clinical data. Particularly with respect to COVID-19, I would say that because speed is of the essence, as you said, there's not as much bottom-up research and infrastructure for data science to address COVID. We are leveraging the existing capabilities that we have at hand right now and infusing money in terms of what we call Jumpstart to help them go fast forward. And we're doing this with the NCATS, the N3C, to help them partner with idea states and underserved populations so that their data sets are richer and more robust. We're enhancing the Biodata Catalyst and HLBI's data platform to enrich their PEDAL and Siren networks with COVID-19 data and helping ensure that their platforms are interoperable with the work that we're doing at NCATS. And the same for all of us, increasing their participants for COVID positive patients and increasing their ability to do a lightweight HMO type of platform that is, again, interoperable. So we are basically infusing money in existing systems to help them ramp up their capabilities in addressing COVID right now, because we simply cannot wait. And some of this can't be done at the pace of research. It has to be done at the pace of industry, where we do rapid, agile development of platforms and get them out to researchers as fast as we can.
Mm. So if you have any specifics, that's great. I imagine it might be too early for that at this point in everything. But when all this is over, do you think that there's going to be a leap forward in some of these? I mean, are innovations happening right now out there? I imagine they must be, right? As you mentioned, you have to move at the speed of industry, not research, in order to meet this challenge. But that doesn't mean people aren't coming up with innovative ideas that they do want to see borne out. How much, from your experience, your readings, your understanding of past pandemics, how much innovation can we expect to come out of this on the other side?
Oh, I think the innovation is going to happen definitely in the clinical development of new therapeutics and vaccines at an unprecedented pace. In terms of new diagnostics and tools, my understanding is that the number of cool tools and diagnostics that are coming through our pipeline is unprecedented. In data science, some of the interesting innovation is coming through truly making our platforms actually interoperable. And this is because folks they're dedicated to this, and they are working long hours building on existing platforms to actually make truly interoperable at scale resources. And I think that's where for data science, some of our innovations will come in for now. And then in the future, we're going to see some pretty cool innovations in terms of how people aggregate and analyze data, how they develop new AI tools to look at not just images, but images that have with them an awful lot of genomics, proteomics, maybe environmental data. So I think that we're going to see new innovations in the analysis of data, because we've made so much data available in such a short period of time. At least that's the hope.
That's the hope.
That's the hope for me. My ultimate goal is to get the data and the information in the hands of those really super bright researchers so that they can use it and really make unbelievably good progress in understanding this pandemic, understanding the features and diagnostics of this pandemic, and developing really cool tools for the next pandemic or for COVID-19 in its sequelessence, because the effects of COVID will certainly be here after we have developed our vaccines and our therapeutics.
Yeah. One last question for you before we wrap up. What's missing right now, particularly from a data science perspective? What tools are not there? What data isn't there? What resources do you not have that you wish you had? This pandemic came on fast. If you were, sitting here at the same date in 2019 and you knew what was about to happen, what kind of data-centric resources would you try to spin up?
So you bring such a great question, because, in 2019, we sort of were moving at the speed of research. And, we were talking about, single sign-on and one-stop authentication and passport authorization of data. And we were starting to talk about, how are we going to globally search across all of our resources for data? If you know what's there, it's pretty straightforward to do your computational analytics and your tools, but you don't know what you don't know. So how can we make...
Right? When you say single sign-on, you mean like if a researcher, because I'm just realizing, if there isn't one database, researcher has to go to lots of different places and hopefully they have access to all the places they need. Is that
exactly?
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's exactly the problem. And so researchers would go to 5 or 6 different platforms and credential themselves and have to go through the data access process at each of those platforms. It's kind of a lot of work for them. And that's just the first step.
Yeah.
So we want to solve that. That's a problem that can be solved. And actually, we have actually solved it, at least, in phase 1. And I just can't thank my colleagues at NIH enough for and in the community for the work that they've done to make that happen. But now, what I really wish we had the ability was to compute across the metadata and the information about the data in a way that was at scale. And that's in the petabyte search on petabytes of data. We don't have that capability. Even I think BigQuery is limited by the construction of the metadata. So true AI on data to help find it and aggregate it and understand, what's missing. So how do we know the data is completed to answer the questions we have?
Because if we're talking petabytes, you can't just go line by line through a spreadsheet.
No, not at all. So that kind of capability, I really wish we had that in a way that would make it, reasonable for researchers in reasonable amounts of time, that they could actually get the data and then analyze it in a way that made sense to them.
So what's missing there? Do you need a supercomputer that's able to compute at that level, or do you need an AI algorithm that's able to smooth out and clean the data?
Maybe a bit of both, actually. I think there's room for both. I came from DOE. I have a great appreciation for the capabilities of the infrastructure. Summit is amazing. It's really pretty cool. And the new infrastructures that are being developed in the national labs and, now at NIH, leveraging our cloud service providers, Google and AWS. I have an appreciation for what you can do in the cloud. I think that there's room for both. We've moved 71 petabytes of biomedical research data to both Google and AWS, so it's the total. There's no way we can search across that amount of data. We don't have that capability. And now that COVID is making this need so much more, that it would be my one wish, is that we could do that, have that capability now for researchers to really quickly find the data that they were interested in. And then if it's controlled access, another quick process for requesting access to that data. The faster we can get researchers the data that they need, the faster they will be able to get the results that they desire to answer the questions of importance.
Okay, so we'll have to add that to the next pandemic, 100-year pandemic response toolkit. Make sure we have those things ready to go.
Yeah.
Dr. Gregurick, we're out of time for today, but I really appreciate you joining me. This was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, and for me too. Thank you so much, Aaron, and for the entire team. It's been a wonderful time together. I wish everybody well, and stay healthy and stay safe, and wear your mask.